connections in Iran relate to me something from a very high level IRGC source. They are ready for war. Essentially, they said that most of the commanders, if not all of them, with a few exceptions, they have public meetings, etc. They are in their bunkers, concentrated on the possibility of war. One of the terms that they used was war conditions. They are analyzing everything around in West Asia, signs coming from Washington, etc., and they consider that the possibility of an attack is very, very high.
Our good friend Pepe Escobar was supposed to go to Iran next week for a summit on U.S.-Iranian relations, if there are any relations, I guess. It's supposed to be like a dialogue summit, people-to-people diplomacy, this sort of thing. And they were going to bring a bunch of international independent journalists, voices who are popular on social media to come out to this event in Tehran. And obviously, this is very important if you're about to go to war, right? To get international voices in, to speak about what's happening, to try and denounce the efforts by certain adversarial countries, the US, Israel, the UK, who are trying to push for more strikes and more war, okay? Now, this summit was canceled. It was supposed to happen next week. Pepe was supposed to go there, amongst many others. And the summit got canceled. Why did it get canceled? Because the Iranians say they are on essentially high alert for war. Now, I want you to put that in perspective because for the past several months, the Iranians have been okay with allowing foreigners in to come visit, document what's going on, and showcase the world what the truth is about Iran. But now times have changed and they say no. All right. It seems as though we're about to get a war. That's really what it seems like. What you're going to hear from Pepe, I think, will convince you of just that. It's so sad. It's so sad because I remember after the 12-day war, not too long after, like a few weeks after, a lot of Israeli sources were coming out and saying, yes, there will be another war on Iran, and we aim to do it before December. We're pretty much there. Pretty much there. Okay. October 24th, we are pretty much there, where I think it could very well happen in December or November. They said before the end of the year. So November, December, I think we're going to get a war in Iran. I don't think it's going to be pretty. And the one thing I'll say before we get into some of Pepe's clips here, talking about how his trip was canceled and what he actually heard from the Iranians as to why they're not going to be bringing people into the country right now, is that Iran crushed Israel in the 12-day war. We all understand that. We all understand that. The only issues that Iran had in the 12-day war were, one, they got taken by surprise with the decapitation strikes. Okay, you got taken by surprise. 24 hours later, you put the pieces back together as best you could. And for the next 3 days, you delivered such a relentless blow to the Israelis that Israeli military commanders and generals were begging Netanyahu to call Washington and beg for a ceasefire. Now, Netanyahu didn't do that. On day 4 of the conflict, he got the U.S. to agree behind closed doors that they would do the strike on Iran. So that was Netanyahu's way of opting out of a ceasefire on day 4. He said, well, I'll go to the U.S. and I'll bully them into striking Iran, and then we don't have to pull out. Well, this time, there's not going to be a surprise attack in that manner. Okay, there's not going to be a surprise attack in that manner. Of course, they will attack. Will the Iranian air defense perform? Do they have new air defense? We don't know exactly. But it's not going to be like how it was last time. Will they target Pezeshkian? Pezeshkian surely thinks so. He thinks that he's essentially a dead man walking. He said as much in New York City when he met with a bunch of American journalists there. He said, I understand that these are probably my final days on Earth. I'm probably going to be targeted in the next war. There will be a next war. I think Israel's going to start it very soon, and I think they're going to target me. Will they potentially target the supreme leader? God forbid. but it is possible. I want to put that aside for a second, though, because the other major problem that Iran had in the 12-day war was the domestic infiltration. And not just domestic infiltration of like security services. That's to be expected, I guess, in any country. Every country, their security services are infiltrated to a certain degree in one way or another, even Israel. Okay. In fact, Iranian intelligence just released a new video a few hours ago within Mossad. They were taking videos and stuff, and they're documenting things within the outfit. But the problem was obviously the terror attacks within Iran. Now, since the 12-day war, Iran has done several things. First of all, they have taken the legal matters into their own hands and prosecuted those who are guilty of treason. And that means what you think it means. In Iran, if someone is guilty of treason, they uphold the law to the utmost extent. In addition to that, Iran deported many migrants, primarily Afghan migrants, who were responsible for a lot of these, office studio drone factories, if you will, and the productions of a lot of these explosive devices and whatnot that were utilized internally within the 12-day war. That was a really big problem for Iran because, the air defenses, a lot of people said, oh, well, Iran's air defenses didn't work so well. Well, really, Iran's air defenses were not utilized all that much because when the internal drone attacks started to take place inside of Iran from these people that have no money, they're migrants, they have no future, so they were working for Mossad. When this was happening, what were the drones targeting? They were targeting a lot of things, but one of the main targets of these drones were the air defense systems in Iran. Because if your air defense systems are set up in a manner to target missile attacks coming from Israel, and then you have a drone flying from behind that, you're not even prepared for this, it's going to take out all of your air defenses. So Iran made a calculated decision. They said, okay, we're going to retire some of our air defenses. We are going to sacrifice our air defense, and we are going to do that to save our air defenses for the future. Turned out to be probably a pretty wise move. Because, as you know, the most extensive damage done unto Iran in the 12-day war was that first night of decapitation strikes. So Iran will still have a problem with this internal aggression, but it will not be in any way, shape, or form anywhere close to as bad as it was in the first 12-day war. So that's the main problems that Iran faced, and they're not going to face those problems again. But the reason why I'm telling you all of this is because there is one problem that Iran does face right now in this next war looms, that not enough people are talking about. It's not a pretty thing to think about. Fareshta Siddiqui, who I had on my show Legitimate Targets a few weeks ago, she brought this up. And she said, look, the Israelis dropped, five Hiroshima worth of bombs on Gaza over the past 2 years. Why does no one think that Israel would just drop a nuke on Iran? Why does anyone believe? Why is no one talking about the fact that if the war is going in a very bad way for the Israelis, that they would not resort to dropping a nuke on Tehran, for example? It's a scary thing to think about, but it is the truth. Israel could very well drop a nuke on Iran. So before we get into that, I wanted to mention this. It's a scary thing, but we have to think about it because this next war is not going to go any better for Israel. Everyone knows it. Everyone is saying it. So that leads you to the conclusion of, if Israel is going to wage a war on Iran because they know for a fact that this is going to be a bad decision. Iran only used a small fraction of their missile technology in the first war. And in that first war, What happened? They obliterated Israeli defenses. Every single layer of Israeli air defenses was exposed and humiliated. They targeted Site 81, the Israeli military HQ. If they're starting a war knowing that they're going to get smoked, what is the obvious conclusion here? That they are thinking about delivering the final blow to Iran via a nuclear bomb. Whether or not that's going to happen, I don't know, but you can bet your ass that that is being discussed and probably planned for right now in Tel Aviv. With that, let's watch some of these videos. Pepe, in this first video, he talks about a major U.S.-Iran people-to-people diplomacy conference that was canceled, and he describes the reason why.
For the confirmation. I didn't say that before openly because I was waiting for the confirmation. I was ready to go to a very important conference in Iran next week, beginning of next week, about U.S.-Iran relations, essentially. This weekend, we heard from the organizers that the conference was canceled. And guess what? The reason was once again war conditions. So this is very, very serious. I cannot name the organization that is responsible for this conference. I can only say that it's one of the top organizations of the Iranian system. So for them to cancel a conference, bringing foreign guests like us, which would be excellent from their point of view to have foreigners in Iran right now at the moment relaying the Iranian point of view to the outside world and especially to the global south, to cancel that at the last minute, literally. I had already made my visa application. I was already waiting for the confirmation of the visa. And, you know, all that in the last minute is not a good sign. This means that they are very, very worried.
Yeah. Not a good sign whatsoever. Pepe goes on to, so he basically just said they're on high alert, they're on red alert for war. This video explains what the IRGC commanders are doing right now.
Well, I prefer to start relaying what I heard from connections in Iran, and one of them who relayed to me something from a very high level IRGC source. They are ready for war. And essentially, they said that most of the commanders, if not all of them, with a few exceptions, they have public meetings, etc. They are in their bunkers, concentrated on the possibility of war. One of the terms that they used was war conditions. I don't know if this is a direct translation from Farsi. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But I interpret it as they are analyzing everything around in West Asia, signs coming from Washington, etc., and they consider that the possibility of an attack is very, very high, which is something extremely worrying for all of us and for the global south as a whole.
IRGC commanders are in bunkers preparing for conflict, and they are calling it war conditions, and they are watching Washington and Tel Aviv very closely. Not so good. But if I were to give you some good news about all of this, I want to remind you that in the first days after the 12-day war, where were IRGC military officials? They were in China, meeting with Chinese top defense officials. Over the past few weeks, how many Russian cargo planes have entered into Iran and dropped off loads of equipment, including new advanced MiG-29 fighter jets? Keep in mind, Scott Ritter discussed this, that the MiG-29s, the older MiG-29s that Iran was using in the 12-day war, they were locking onto their Israeli targets. there were several instances where Israel was attempting to target Iran, Tehran in particular, and they got locked in on by the older generation MiG-29s. And they didn't knock them out of the sky. I don't know if that was a conscious decision or not, but they didn't knock them out of the sky. If it was over a civilian zone, maybe that could have been why. But they did lock in on them, and as a result of that, the Israelis had to abandon some of these strike missions. So now Iran has new MiG-29s. Their pilots are being trained on Su-35s in Russia right now. I think they're probably getting the infrastructure to host these Su-35s in Tehran or in their air bases on the outskirts of the country. They're probably getting that stuff now. I don't believe they have the Su-35s yet. And they also probably have S-400s being delivered. We know that they have S-400s monitoring where the Russian nuclear scientists are working at certain nuclear plants. Maybe they got more. Pepe also discusses this in his conversation. We get a lot of information from Pepe today because he was supposed to go there. But he was supposed to, so he talked about this subject in a little bit more detail than I just did with regard to the immense development of the Russian-Iranian relationship since the 12-Day War. Because I'll also add, Russian-Iranian relationship, by the way, a lot of top Russians, when the 12-Day War began, they said, hey, look, we offered to Iran, because Iran and Russia had this joint security pact. I know there's a lot of debate on this issue. I'm just giving you what the Russians said right now. Well, as the 12-Day War began, a lot of top Russians said, look, we offered Iran the same exact security guarantees, which in effect are a mutual defense guarantee that we have with North Korea. We offered that to Iran. The Iranians were not interested. Would the Raisi administration have been interested in something like that? Were they in dialogue with the Russians on something like that? It's possible, but we all know what happened to Raisi. Well, we know, but we're not allowed to really say what happened to Raisi. Now, the Pezeshkian administration, apparently prior to the 12-Day War, was not interested in that. It seems as though situations may have changed after the 12-Day War.
Well, this is why they learned a lot from the 12-Day War. And they also learned a lot from the fact that they were caught basically staring at the headlights in the middle of the highway in the first 24 hours. And it took them at least less than 48 hours to recover. They had help. I think we discussed this before. They had underground Russian help to restore their grid and their information grid, especially. This is all that we know in terms of direct Russian help. We still don't know if Russia supplied more. And that brings us to an exchange of letters, Judge, very, very important in the past few days. Ali Larijani, from the Supreme Security Council in Iran, he went personally to meet Putin in Moscow, carrying a personal letter from Ayatollah Khamenei.
Wow.
And guess what happened 2 days later? He came back to Tehran carrying a personal letter from Vladimir Putin to Ayatollah Khamenei. So this means that they are discussing everything that we are talking now at the highest level.
All right. Now, I asked you earlier.
Now, I want to add one more thing to this story about Iran, because this story just broke. This was, I believe it was from last week, and this was only published in Farsi, in Iranian media. But it's very interesting. So in Iran, there is a man, very respected man, named Ismail Khatib. Ismail Khatib is the Minister of Information and Intelligence for Iran. Now, the reason why Ismail Khatib is very important is because he was appointed to this position because he is one of Raisi's closest, the martyr Raisi, one of Raisi's men. He was in that circle. He was not a part of the reformist circle with Pezeshkian. He's not funded by Javad Zarif. He's not a part of that network. He's one of the quote-unquote hardliners. And this is Iran's intelligence minister, okay? Now, he's not afraid to tell the truth. Ismail Khatib is not afraid to say what's really going on. He's not going to pull punches. He came out with a report last week, again, but this has now been translated, about how 50 foreign countries, if you can believe it, were utilizing their spy services during the 12-day war to attack Iran. If you can believe it. Israel assisted by over 50 spy services in attack on Iran. This is during the 12-day war, okay? The intelligence minister added that the enemy, during that 12-day war, had a plan for overthrow and disintegration through an all-out hybrid war and employed military attacks using the latest global technologies and knowledge it had acquired from Western civilization. 50 countries means there were probably a lot of Arab countries. A lot of Arab countries involved in this, okay? Now, two of the countries that were involved in this were neighbors Turkey and Azerbaijan. Turkey and Azerbaijan were assisting Israel in espionage attacks, possibly hacks, possibly who knows what, trying to dismantle their systems, maybe take things offline. Turkey and Azerbaijan were working with the Israelis to attack Iran during the 12-day war, according to Intelligence Minister Ismail Khatib of Iran. Now, this is important because Iran at this point, I think, realized they were fighting too many wars at once. Okay, so you have the internal direct threat from Israeli-funded terrorists launching these drone attacks, doing these bombings. Okay. You have the 50 spy agencies from across the world who are attacking Iran in coordination with Mossad, with Turkey and Azerbaijan as well participating. Then, of course, you have the direct attacks from Israel and you have the direct attacks from the United States. At that point, I think Iran was in their right minds to say, we need to get our stuff together. We need to address some of these problems, and we need to prepare ourselves for what will eventually come, which is probably a second war. And I hope from the bottom of my heart that they are prepared, because it's not going to be any easier this time. They will have new tricks up their sleeves. They could use a nuke, and well, they may have addressed some of the issues, but they got to be prepared for whatever is thrown their way. And it could be quite a bit.